What's going on, guys? Sticks here with the Token Minorities, bringing you part 2 of Scumbag Week, and today we are exploring the expanded tier with a deck idea that I actually got from TeamFishKnuckles, so shoutouts to them, and that is a deck centered around Exeggutor and Decidueye. And before I get into the deck, just a reminder that if you guys liked this video or found it helpful, please leave a like, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button. Helps us out and lets us do more for you guys. And if you did not join me for the first installment of Scumbag Week on Monday, I want to let you guys know that the reason I am doing an entire week based on Scumbaggy decks is because of the undeniable success and impact decks centered around Disruption and Lock have had on the metagame. So I wanted to do due diligence to that very viable and successful strategy. However, I did not want to do it completely throughout the year to where you guys had to worry about, oh, is Sticks going to do a Scumbaggy deck this week? And I decided to just put it all at once in 1 week, show you guys some different decks, and let you guys, you know, judge for yourself as to how Scumbaggy the decks truly are. So as for the question of the day, doing basically exactly what I did on Monday, and that is asking you, what is the most Scumbaggy deck you guys can think of in the expanded tier? Now, admittedly, there were plenty of decks to choose from. There's Seismitoad Lock, there's Vileplume, there's Giratina, I mean, there's Hammer Time, Garbodor. There are so many different disruptions to choose from in the expanded tier. I actually ended up going with a non-item lock, non-hammer, well, there is one hammer, but that's kind of for a different reason. A non-item lock, non-hammer based version of a disruption deck, and let me explain why. So item lock, you can get those turn 1. There's plenty of those with Seismitoad, Trevenant, Vileplume. I think those are the only 3 truly viable item locks. I mean, I know that there's something with like Death and Dragonite, but I think that's just in the Legacy format. But all those item locks are devastating in their own right. That being said, there's also things like Sableye Hammer Time, which disrupts all your opponent is able to do. I actually decided to go against all of those and go with a deck that actually is not, that does not use item lock or hammers except for the one enhanced hammer, and that is Exeggutor. In my opinion, supporter lock is the most devastating lock that there is in basically all of Pokemon, in my opinion. Now, with decks like Trevenant and Vileplume and Seismitoad, I've faced those decks quite a bit in the expanded format, and in each of those instances, there are ways to play around it. Now, for a frame of reference, I use a Turbo Darkrai deck 90% of the time when I'm playing expanded. Really, the only time I don't is when I'm testing out a new deck for a video, or I'm actually recording a deck for a video. But other than that, I use Turbo Darkrai 99% of the time, and against things like Trevenant, Vileplume, and Seismitoad, I'm usually able to get one turn, and if I'm not able to get one turn against like Vileplume and Trevenant, well, against Trevenant, Darkrai has the advantage anyway, so just manual attachments are enough. Or you can do things like Lysandre around, you can Hex Maniac to be able to use your items. There are ways around it, and there are ways to fight through it. So, I mean, while item locks are devastating, do not get me wrong, and have had a ton of success, there are ways around it. As for the hammer decks, like, Hammer Time with Sableye is the only one that inherently comes to mind. However, I know that there are other decks that use Crushing Hammer and stuff like that. I'm able to just save all of my, like, Max Elixirs, Dark Patches, and Energies. I'm able to save those for just one big turn where I'm able to explode and just destroy my opponent and put them way, way back, or to where they have nothing, or to where they have to deal with a huge attacker right in front of them that they're not capable of handling. The reason I decided to go with Exeggutor is because in all of those instances, supporters are your way of getting out of those and are your way of getting to your resources that allow you to handle those different decks, whether that be Lysandring a Vileplume, Junipering away, getting draw supporters, all that type of stuff, or Zerosicking or Team Flare Grunting away a DCE on a Seismitoad to buy you a turn. All of those supporters are the most important part of being able to go around those strategies. And in this deck, we lock you out of your supporters. We don't allow our opponents to be able to draw and all of that. And the idea behind that is your opponent's going to be able to draw through their first turn. They're able to have an explosive first turn. It's not a big deal. Once you lock them out of supporters, they run out of ways of being able to get access to their different cards. They run out of ways of being able to be like, oh, well, crap, how do I get out of this lock? I can't Lysandre. I can't draw more cards. Like, I'm just out of resources, and that is where this deck flourishes. Now, yes, there are ways of combining Exeggutor and Vileplume. That, to me, isn't conducive to being able to do enough damage to be able to actually win. There is Vileplume, Decidueye, but again, doesn't lock your opponent out of supporters, and then an Exeggutor Decidueye Vileplume deck is just way too clunky for any practical use. So I decided to go with the TeamFishKnuckles deck that I found, which was the Exeggutor Decidueye version, where Exeggutor locks your opponent out of supporters with blockade, and Decidueye just piles up the damage, makes that 10 damage, well, occasionally 40 with Silver Bangle, but makes that damage actually substantial in many, many cases. So that is the deck I decided to go with. And I know I rambled for a long time, but I just wanted to explain to you guys why I think this is the most scumbag deck in the expanded format. As for the Pokemon, you have two Shaymin because you want to have the explosive first turn of being able to set up Decidueye. 4/4 of Execute and Exeggutor. Now, for a long time, I tinkered with the idea of only 3 Execute because Propagate just allows you to put it back from the discard pile into your hand. But I found in a lot of cases, I had 1 or 2 Executes prized, and so I wanted that double propagation whenever I needed it, but also having another Execute out on the field to be able to evolve into Exeggutor. So that's why I decided to end up going with the exact 4/4 that FishKnuckles had. And then 4/4 of Rowlet through Decidueye, because these are really where the damage starts to pile up. And also Decidueye has a very nice GX attack. Exeggutor does not have a GX attack. So Hollow Hunt is very nice for later. I mean, yeah, it gives your opponent a turn of supporters, but it could just get you those crucial cards out of your discard pile that you need at a certain time. So yeah, just 2 Shaymin, then 4 of all of the other Pokemon that we run in this deck. 1 Battle Compressor, because Battle Compressor essentially turns into a way to use essentially it turns into a level ball. It gets Execute. Sorry, I'm having trouble with English. It gets Execute in the discard pile, where you can propagate it back into your hand to be able to Computer Search and Ultra Ball for free. And yeah, I mean, Battle Compressor, while also activating things like VS Seeker, it gets the Execute in the discard pile, which is where you want them. Execute in the discard pile is actually the best place for them. In the deck, can't use Propagate. On the field, yeah, you can evolve into Exeggutor, but really, you want Execute in the discard pile up until the moment that you want to evolve them into Exeggutor. So yeah, 1 Battle Compressor, like to run more, but there just wasn't room. 1 Computer Search as the A-spec of choice. Again, with Execute, you get to use Computer Search essentially for free. 1 Enhanced Hammer, because one way this deck can lose is if our opponent gets a big Yveltal EX powered up in the 1 turn that they get items, or not necessarily Yveltal, but Yveltal's the most common. So Enhanced Hammer is a way of being able to deal with that. Just be like, okay, we need to get rid of that DCE, need to get rid of whatever energy you have, because if your opponent gets set up in that 1 turn, you do struggle to be able to keep up and lock them out while being able to take prizes. So Enhanced Hammer allows us to be like, okay, slow down there. 2 Level Ball and 2 Ultra Ball as our search cards, just because, I mean, Execute can be sought out with Level Ball and then discarded, while Rowlet and Dartrix can both be searched with Level Ball. 2 Revitalizer, just because we're going to be discarding a lot of stuff. Exeggutor is not the most bulky of Pokemon, so it will get knocked out. So you want to have a constant stream of Exeggutors. So Revitalizer is very nice to be able to get the Exeggutors back after they get knocked out, and also to get back like discarded Dartrix or Decidueye when you didn't have a Forest of Giant Plants, and now you have it, so you have those guys back into your hand. One thing I want to point out, never ever use Revitalizer to get back an Execute. Execute can get itself back. You don't need to worry about that. 4 Ultra Ball to get what we want when we want. 4 Trainers, or not 4 Trainers Mail, 4 VS Seeker to be able to reuse our supporters. And you might notice that we don't have any Trainers Mail in this deck. There was not room. There really was just not room but this deck actually works well enough with Exeggcute being able to provide free searching with Ultra Ball and Computer Search. You guys will see when I use it. 4 Forest Giant Plants to be able to evolve up first turn, and then as for these supporters, we have 3/2 of N and Juniper. I would like to run 4, but I just didn't have room. 1 Team Flare Grunt to kind of combine with Enhanced Hammer to be like, okay, opponent, slow down. Just get rid of some of your stuff. That way we can lock you and not have all of our Exeggutor knocked out in the process. 1 Hex Maniac, because Hex Maniac actually does not hurt this deck like it would with Vileplume. If you played Hex Maniac and Vileplume, your opponent would get a free turn of items, but in this deck, our supporter lock is through an attack. So yes, while Pokemon Ranger can technically... Actually, no, what? Pokemon Ranger can't even do that. I just realized Pokemon Ranger is a supporter, which you cannot use once you're under blockade lock. So yeah, Hex Maniac is great for being able to lock out abilities and blockade and supporters with blockade. 1 Lysandre. Only need 1 really, just because Decidueye can spread around so much damage with Feather Arrow. 2 Float Stones thrown onto the Decidueyes, so our opponent can't just like escape rope and potentially lock us out of being able to blockade 1 turn. 2 Silver Bangle to help increase the damage of blockade, because blockade only does 10, which, I mean, you could run Muscle Band. I prefer Silver Bangle, because if you ran Muscle Band, yeah, it's doing 30, which is 10, which is just 10 less than Silver Bangle. But if you're against non-EXs, Decidueye is going to be putting in enough work anyway, and that 10 damage actually really does help out a lot with some of the math. And then 2 DCE and 5 Grass Energy. More Grass Energy than DCE. We're not maxing out on DCE just because those are just for Decidueye. However, Exeggutor can also potentially use them. But then the regular Grass Energy, because Exeggutor only needs 1 energy to be able to blockade. So yeah, that is the deck. Very, very, very straightforward idea. Just blockade every single turn, spread around damage with Feather Arrow, and just watch your opponent not be able to do anything. So yeah, let's go ahead and see the most, in my opinion, the most scumbag deck in Expanded in action. Alright, we have found one against Dom with a, looks like a Turbo Dark with Giratina deck. So this should be interesting. It will honestly depend on who can get set up first. If I can get set up immediately and start, start supporter locking while spreading around with Feather Arrow, I should be in a great position. I start with a pretty solid hand depending on what I draw. I'm going to actually start with Rowlet, and I'm going to get an extra card off of Mulligan, so I should be in a pretty good position. So I start with my Rowlet because I want to be able to discard that Exeggcute, because Exeggcute is just as good in the discard pile as it is in, well, actually it's better in the discard pile than it is in your deck or hand. Well, actually just as good in the hand as it is in the discard pile, better in the discard pile than in the deck, because you can just, it can self-resurrect with propagation. So the thing is, if my opponent can get a Giratina set up immediately, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble, because Giratina can one-shot my my Exeggutors, or simply all he needs is just a Darkrai with 2 Dark Energy and a Giratina with the Double Dragon. Because if he gets that quickly, then he'll be able to one-shot my Exeggutors. I'll only be able to do like at most 100 damage per turn, so I'll fall behind. But if I can manage to lock him out enough, I should be able to come through and be able to win this game. But I will fall behind in the beginning, just because that deck is designed to get set up quickly and in 1 turn, where my deck is like, okay, I'm going to wait for you to not be able to set up after a 2nd turn. So I start off with some stuff that I don't necessarily like. I'm going to get rid of the Lysandre and the Exeggcute to grab a Shaymin. I'm going to have to Shaymin for 2 at this point, which is not something I want to do. So let's just play the Grass Energy onto the Rowlet, Shaymin for 2, hopefully get like a Sycamore or something where I can just like reset my hand. I get nothing. So what I am going to do is just Level Ball for an Exeggcute. There's, well, not Sycamore, Juniper. I always mix that up. I call it Sycamore when it's supposed to be Juniper. I'm grabbing an Exeggcute, going to play that down just so I can evolve into an Exeggutor next turn. Then I'm going to propagate, potentially, you know what, yeah, just play that down so I can evolve into 2 Exeggutors next turn in case I'm able to draw into something, because I want to be able to just play down my hand, like in case I draw into a Shaymin. That way I can play down 2 Exeggutor, I can Team Flare Grunt the Double Dragon off of my opponent's Giratina, and I draw into nothing again. So what I am going to do is just Team Flare Grunt, get rid of that Double Dragon, evolve into Exeggutor, evolve into another Exeggutor, and then evolve into Dartrix, and yeah, just Sharp Blade Quill. Apparently my opponent didn't have much, and neither did I, so we're just forced to kind of go from here. This is bad. My opponent does play another Double Dragon, and alright, looks like we are both incredibly stuck. However, at this point, I'm actually going to be okay going into next turn, because I can Feather Arrow, and this is where Hollow Hunt actually comes into play. Like, I'm not going to be able to do much otherwise, but what I can do at this point is actually, instead of Razor Leaf, just go ahead and Hollow Hunt, be able to grab my Level Ball, my Ultra Ball, and then probably just the Team Flare Grunt to set my opponent back even further, because now my opponent will not be able to one-shot my Decidueye. I'll be able to search out and execute with the Level Ball. I'll be able to discard that and the Decidueye for a Shaymin Team Flare Grunt, and then just Shaymin for a fresh hand of 6. And yeah, my opponent, both of us started off really, really slow, but luckily Hollow Hunt GX was able to get me to the point where my opponent was like, well, I don't have anything, he now has something, so I'm just kind of screwed and I'm going to scoop. So quick first game, but unfortunately a lot of games like this are quick. Once you get set up, your opponent just forfeits. So yeah, going to try to find another one with this deck. Alright, we have found another one against Gronacek, I don't even know, with a Fighting and Lightning deck. So I'm very, very, very interested to see what this is. I mean, the only deck that comes to mind when I see that combination is a deck that I made a while ago, and that is a Crocodile Ampharos Prime deck, but that's not obviously legal and expanded. So I do start off with a very nice hand. I start off with a very, very nice hand. I have a Forest, I have a DCE, I have a couple Exeggcute, and a Juniper. I mean, the Juniper is the biggest thing, because last game I really just couldn't get a supporter that got, well, I couldn't get a draw support. I got Team Flare Grunt, which fortunately put me in a position where I could work with it. I'm going to start with Exeggcute, just because I do have the Forested Giant Plants. I'm going to discard my other Exeggcute just because. And my opponent starts with Landorus, so this is a little bit scary. I'm going to have to evolve Exeggcute up as soon as possible, otherwise it's going to get knocked out by Hammerhead. I'm going to Level Ball for another Exeggcute just to throw that into my discard pile immediately. Evolve my Rowlet into Dartrix, put the DCE onto the Exeggcute just so I can have energy for a potential Exeggutor, which I do draw. And this is a really, really nice hand. Wow. I'm going to be able to get another Decidueye. I'm going to play the Silver Bangle onto my Exeggutor, Level Ball, probably grab another Rowlet, just because, I mean, I have the Exeggcutes in my discard pile. I can get those whenever I want. Play that down, play both Float Stones onto my Rowlet and Decidueye, and then Shaymin for a fresh hand of 6. See if I can get something else to work with, and wow, that is just gorgeous, because I do get another Decidueye up. I'm going to be able to get another Exeggutor, and I mean, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. I decided to just go with the Exeggcute in my hand to evolve it into the Exeggutor, because the two Exeggcutes in my discard pile, I have access to them whenever I want. An Exeggcute in the hand is actually worse than an Exeggcute in the discard pile, because if my opponent ends me, then that Exeggcute goes back into the deck. Meanwhile, the Exeggcutes that are in the discard pile are just there whenever I need them. And yeah, this is the ideal turn 1 setup. I mean, you could not ask for a better turn 1 setup. I have two Decidueyes. I have an Exeggutor with a Silver Bangle on it. I'm going to be able to consistently get Feather Arrow and then Blockade for maximum damage. My opponent plays Gold Potion. That's interesting. He is just going to start targeting down a Decidueye, which I completely disagree with, actually. I have a Revitalizer. It's going to grab me two Exeggcutes, which really doesn't do anything because Exeggcutes have built-in Revitalizer. I am going to go ahead and Feather Arrow my opponent's Landorus. Just get some damage on it, and I'm actually, yeah, you know what, let's go ahead and Juniper, just get rid of that. See if I can get another, wow. I'm going to be able to get a third Decidueye into play, and this is why I kept the Exeggcutes in the discard pile, because now I can go ahead and get both of them, Ultra Ball, get rid of both Exeggcutes, put them back in the discard pile, grab another Rowlet, and I'm immediately going to have 3 Decidueye up, 2 Exeggutor with a Silver Bangle on both of them, and an energy on both of them. And actually, you know what? I'm gonna put the energy on my Decidueye so that I can potentially Razor Leaf. Because I mean, all I need with the Exeggutor is a regular energy to be able to blockade, and I can use a DCE, I can use a Grass Energy, I can use whatever I draw into. This way, if my opponent tries to Lysandre up my Decidueye, I will be able to potentially Razor Leaf next turn for a knockout on the Landorus. And I forgot to Feather Arrow with my last Decidueye. I don't think that's going to be a big deal, because I still will be able to do 100 damage with the combination of 3 Feather Arrows plus Blockade to knock out my opponent's Landorus EX. And yeah, I mean, I'm in a perfect position. I really am, and my opponent agrees. He couldn't play any supporters even if he drew into one, so he is just going to scoop right there. I do not blame him at all. I had the single most ideal setup you could ever hope for in this deck. We kept my opponent from being able to do much of anything at all. Once we got set up, just Blockade, being like, nope, no supporters for you. And that honestly is exactly why I think this deck is the biggest scumbag deck, because it's like, well, you don't get to use supporters. We're not item locking you, but you don't get to use supporters, which is your main means of draw. But anyway, too short. Gonna try to find another one. Alrighty, we have found another one against Exeggutor I don't even know. 1, 3, 4, 6, 7, or 6, 7, 9 with a Psychic and Electric deck. So I mean, it's probably Night March without any. Okay, it's definitely Night March just without Shaymin, which in my opinion is a very, very weak form of Night March. We do start off with a subpar hand, and okay, this is 100% Night March, except with like roller skates as a means of draw support, and we do see the Lampent. So unless this is a random Chandelure deck that runs the Night March Lampent, which admittedly I have done before just to kind of throw people off, make them think I was running Night March, even though I wasn't running any Lightning Pokemon at the time. But either way, we do get to draw a couple cards. Is it something we can use? Not particularly, so check this out. I'm going to play the Float Stone onto my Exeggcute just because, I mean, Silver Bangle won't be doing anything in this matchup at all. And then let's just... Okay, so I had to Juniper away a lot of stuff, but I did get a lot of stuff in the process. I'm going to grab an Exeggcute with my Level Ball just because I can go ahead and Ultra Ball those guys away, grab a Rowlet, because if I can get a couple Decidueye up, I can just, like, start knocking out these, Night Marchers like there's no tomorrow. I am actually going to hold on to the Revitalizer for the time being, just in case I need, like, another Decidueye or something. But I do get a Forest of Giant Plants, which means I will be able to get a Decidueye. So what I am going to do is Revitalizer to grab that Exeggutor and the Quilladin, or not the Quilladin, what am I saying? The Dartrix. Sorry, I honestly have no idea why I called it Quilladin. I mean, it kind of makes sense because they're birds and quills and stuff like that, but I am just going to evolve straight into an Exeggutor and then actually retreat into the Rowlet, kind of put it up as fodder, and then Feather Arrow, knock out, or not knock out, set up the Joltik to be knocked out next turn by another Feather Arrow unless my opponent gets a Fighting Fury Belt on it. And this is actually one of the matchups I was really looking forward to, because without a what am I trying to say? Without without supporters, Night March really, really loses steam late game. And unfortunately, my opponent just forfeits, and also Decidueye is super strong against Night March, but my opponent just forfeits, so we really don't get to see it play out. But I guess my opponent saw that I would have a super strong matchup against him and decided, yeah, I'm just not going to play this. So again, another super short match, but let's try to find one good one with this deck. Alrighty, we have found another one against Scum Trees, Scam Trees, I don't even know. Could be Scum Trees, for all we know. With a Psychic and normal deck. Luckily, we don't see the metal, otherwise I would think that this is a Trevenant Jirachi deck. But either way, I mean, Psychic is still scary. I'm going to start with a Rowlet just because I have the Exeggcute in my hand. I can always just discard that later if I want to. Well, I can discard that to be able to just put it back in my hand later, potentially use it for Ultra Ball shenanigans. My opponent starts with a Toxicroak. That's actually very interesting. I'm wondering what my opponent is actually running. because you normally... What? Actually, you know what? Verbank with triple poison could be very, very scary. Ooh. What I can do here is go ahead and grab... Wow, I just sounded like Maximilian Pegasus from Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series. What I am going to do here is actually grab a Dartrix. That way, I can immediately get a turn one Decidueye. So let's go ahead and computer search, get rid of the Juniper and the Exeggcute, and get rid of the Juniper just because I have a VS Seeker in my hand. Grab a Forest of Giant Plants. That way I can immediately go into a Decidueye, and I have the Silver Bangle, which, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to go ahead and get that Exeggcute back into my hand so I have something to play the Silver Bangle on that is useful. And I mean, I can always just battle Compressor to get my other Exeggcute in the discard pile. I run 4 of them, so it's not a huge deal, and boom, there you go. So I will be able to battle Compressor, get both Exeggcute in the discard pile, and also probably the Team Flare Grunt. That's probably what I'm going to want to do. Let's go ahead and Exeggcute. Probably, do I want to do it twice? No, I'm just going to do it once. That way I can maximize my potential Shaymin that I'm going to get off of this. Let's go ahead and grab that. Play the Float Stone onto the... Well, first off, play the regular energy onto the Exeggcute, and then Shaymin into 4 more cards, hopefully into another Rowlet, so that I can... Oh, boom, there you go. Hopefully, and I'd be able to get another Decidueye up turn 1, and then double Feather Arrow... Oops, sorry, ran into my desk there. Double Feather Arrow on to the Toxicroak, and yeah, we're in a good position. I mean, as long as he doesn't knock out my Exeggcute, and even if he does, it's not a big deal, because I can just propagate and go from there. So, very, very, very solid first turn. Actually, it's probably as good of a first turn as you could hope. Maybe you hope for an Exeggutor, but at this point, as long as my opponent doesn't snipe out my Exeggcute on the bench, it's not a big deal if I don't have an Exeggutor. But otherwise, my opponent will... Okay, he'll be able to attach another energy and then triple poison, which is going to be a little bit scary. However, I will just retreat my Decidueye out. He actually Skylas for an Ultra Ball. So that's actually really, really nice for me. Gets rid of the Bursting Balloon. Okay, just Ultra Balls for a Shaymin. Must not have had much of anything. That is fine with me. I mean, I would have thought that you would Skyla for the Verbank, but I guess that's a smarter play because it will just potentially be like 60 damage, as opposed to, because I mean I would just immediately retreat out. But we do see the triple poison get 30 damage onto my Decidueye. Not a big deal, because I will be able to just go into my retreat into my Exeggcute, assuming I get an Exeggutor this turn. Let's Juniper away my hand, and I get a bunch of Exeggutor. So I will actually be able to get yet another Decidueye up. I'm going to Exeggcute, propagate once, probably go ahead and propagate twice. Just, I mean, maximize what I've got. Ultra Ball, get rid of both of the Exeggcute. Because, I mean, I can potentially evolve up and grab the Shaymin. There's 2 Decidueye left in the deck. That's fine with me. Let's Rowlet, and then immediately into Dartrix. Play the Float Stone onto that. Go ahead and play the Exeggutor down. Draw into 4 more cards just to hopefully get another Decidueye up. That way I can just maximize what I get off of it. And I do not get another Decidueye. That is slightly unfortunate. However, I will just go ahead and be able to Feather Arrow, get more damage onto this Toxicroak, set it up for 120, and then, well, hit it for 80, and then retreat into my Exeggutor, blockade, set it up for 120 damage to be able to be knocked out by a combination of 1 more Feather Arrow and a blockade, and I can always just Juniper next turn to be able to get a fresh hand of 7 should my opponent knock out my Exeggutor somehow. I mean, there is definitely potential. Yeah, Smash Uppercut will be able to knock out my Exeggutor, but you know what? That's the beauty of Exeggcute. He did knock out my Exeggutor, but I can just promote something with a Float Stone. Immediately just... That's beautiful. Immediately just propagate and Exeggcute back into my hand. Play that sucker right back down. And I mean, I'm really not bothering with the whole... I mean, I guess, yeah, you know what? I am going to bother with the multiple propagation. My opponent is getting a big enough of a hand that I want to deter that. Let's Ultra Ball, get rid of the get rid of the 2 Exeggcute to grab another Decidueye. And this, I mean, I'm going to be able to one-shot, or I will be able to potentially one-shot my opponent's Toxicroak with just the Feather Arrows. I even draw into another energy. I get 3 more of my Forest of Giant Plants. Wow. So what I am going to do, Silver Bangle up my Exeggutor, get another DCE onto it, retreat into said Exeggutor, and then, well, not blockade yet. Not blockade yet. Almost made the mistake there. But I will damage the Toxicroak, and while I could take a knockout on it immediately, I'm actually going to maximize the damage that I'm going to get out of maximize the damage I can get out of blockade, because if I just knock out the Toxicroak, he could just immediately go into his Nidoran, and Silver Bangle would be useless. I will just spread out my damage with Feather Arrow, and then knock out the Toxicroak with my blockade, draw into a couple of prize cards, and yeah, my opponent has absolutely nothing set up. He can put his Nidoran active, but what I can do is just Lysandre up the Shaymin, and then knock that out with a triple Feather Arrow plus blockade next turn. And yeah, I mean, this is okay. He plays the Verbank City Gym, which will be a little bit annoying. However, at this point, I can just immediately counter his Stadium. My opponent cannot play any supporters. That is beautiful for me. I'm going to Lysandre in the Shaymin again, maximize the damage I get out of my Feather Arrows, or blockade, sorry. Maximize the damage I get out of blockade plus Silver Bangle. And I'm actually going to keep the Shaymin active. I'm going to knock out a Nidoran on the bench, set up a potential knockout next turn on the other Nidoran to where I can win the game. And then this way I get 2 turns of blockade onto the Shaymin. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Set the Shaymin up to be blockaded for the knockout next turn, while I do have 3 Feather Arrows to knock out the Nidoran on the bench should my opponent not evolve it. And yeah, I mean, I even have the VS Seeker to Lysandre in my opponent's Shaymin should he decide to retreat it. And he's actually going to power up the Nidoran on the bench. I don't think my opponent realized that I just have the game right here. I can Feather Arrow 3 times, knock out the Nidoran, and then just Exeggutor blockade for the win, knocking out the Shaymin. And that's the power of supporter lock. My opponent could not end me. He could not get rid of my hand unless he had like a red card or something. He would not be able to end me down, and that is why when you get up with this deck, your opponent has a very, very, very difficult time coming back, because they can't use N as a comeback card because they are locked out of it. And this is the exact reason that I chose this deck as the most scumbaggy deck of Expanded. I know that there is Vespiquen Vileplume, I know that there is Trevenant Lock, I know that there are so many more scumbag decks, but I decided to go with this one. I mean, there's even Vileplume Exeggutor, but I decided to go with this because once you're locked out of supporters, you really run out of resources, so it's not as if you can just like draw out of them. I mean, your item cards, while you can use them, they essentially become useless, while Exeggutor is able to pile up damage with blockade, and Decidueye is able to spread around damage with Feather Arrow. So yeah, that is my choice for the most scumbaggy deck of Expanded. Let me know which deck you guys think is the most scumbaggy. Like, comment, subscribe, all of that stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed as much as you could, and this is Styx signing out. Why not? See you guys.